Hi, and welcome back to Rennch. In today's episode, we're going to continue to work on the rear latch panel of my 1969 Porsche 911S. So if you don't know anything about this build, this car was an abandoned race car. This was built in 1994 by a father and son team. They got into a falling out and they left the car for 25 years. It has never been outside. It's never had an engine in it. It's never had a transmission. It's never had wiring. So I bought this shell of a car in 2019 and I'm converting it back into a street car. Now, if you're a Porsche purist, you're not going to love this build. It is ridiculously expensive to try to bring this thing back to an OEM stock 1969 911S. By the way, this is number 22 off the line, 00022. This has been so highly modified that it would literally cost $150,000 just in parts to bring it back to a stock form, which by the way, doesn't excite me that much. So I'm gonna do some really cool stuff with this build, but I wanna start with a chassis and a car that basically looks like it's stock. So what I'm doing is I've used all these great panels from Restoration Design. They've supplied all the panels for this car. If you don't know anything about Restoration Design, they make amazing custom panels for vintage Porsches. 356s, in fact, they have an entire Porsche 356 that they are recreating. So you'll be able to actually get a 356 Speedster brand new from Restoration Design, which is really, really cool. But if you want to check out all their panels, if you're ever working on any kind of Porsche project, I want to thank them for sponsoring this build. The link is in the description if you want to check out Restoration Design. And you can't go wrong. The stuff is amazing. In this case, I have this rear, in fact, both of these fenders and this rear latch panel are from Restoration Design. And I've been trying to fit this rear latch panel. I've never done anything like this before. And after the last episode, I tinkered with this thing for like an hour, just grinding and cutting and body hammering just to get it to where it is now. Since I've never done this before, I don't really know what I'm looking for. Thankfully, I have another 1969 911 that I can refer to in terms of spacing. And we're actually pretty close, but there's a few things that aren't completely dialed. And what I'm doing with this car is I'm using what I call tech screws. They're basically like a sheet metal screw. I don't know if this camera will go. I'm using my iPhone because I just moved here and I don't have all my camera gear set up yet. But this is basically like a screw, but it has a drill bit on the end. I don't know if that'll focus. I hope it will. And I'm using it to fit all of these panels up without welding. These holes that this thing leaves are not even 1/8 of an inch, so you just pop them with a MIG welder and they'll be healed. But before I touch weld to this car, and since I've never done any sort of rear panels or rear quarters or anything like that before, I'm making sure everything's perfect. I'm using the measurements from my stock, well, stockish, 69 911, and measuring everything before I touch a welder to this car. Let me show you what we're gonna do today and how we're gonna keep furthering the fitment on this rear latch panel. So when I measure this from here down to this seam, I get basically 51, see if I can show you guys that, 51 mil. And if I do it on this side, same spot, I'm a few millimeters off, like 3 or 4 mil off. This is a really interesting piece because it gets sandwiched. There's 3 layers of metal. You've got the body of the car, so this is the chassis itself, right? Then you've got, well, first you've got the latch panel. So the latch panel goes all the way on the bottom. Then you've got the body that fits next in between. Then you've got the fender, the rear quarter that goes on top of it. And you can see right here, I've got this really big gap that's happening here. And I think what it's doing is preventing this thing from settling down far enough to get beautifully integrated into this spot. So what I'm gonna do on this side, and this one doesn't have quite as bad of an issue. It's there, but not quite as bad. So what we're gonna do in this video is I'm going to trim this to where it's gonna be. And that means I'm gonna have to take out this chunk of body sheet metal. This is actually also sandwiched because the OEM flare is still trapped in between these two spots. So I need to trim this thing out, trim the layer on top so that I can get to the actual piece to make this thing flush. Once I do that, I think this whole entire rear quarter will settle in. And if I show you here, when I close this, my body gap is actually pretty dialed on this side. It looks really good. This one, not as much. So if I leave this thing to where it's naturally resting, this thing hits. And it's coming at a weird angle. So I've got to get this thing dialed. And once that's done, you know, we'll screw it all together and we'll kind of see where we are. But I'm pretty excited. I do have a rear latch that I can install, and I've got some really cool new hinges that I'll install. So with that, I'm going to pull both of the quarters off and get the grinding wheel out and start getting this thing fit. All right, now that she's about naked, here's what I gotta do. I've gotta trim. I'm gonna trim within this mark here and leave myself a little room to grind. And I'm actually out of weld through primer, so I might go grab some of that before the end of the night, just so I can grind this stuff down and cover it up. Anyway, same drill on this side. I'm gonna give this thing a trim. I'm actually gonna trim a bit of this drip rail as well. Drip rails are going in this car. They are going away. I've experimented with this one already. I did some terrible welding, so I'm not gonna show you that right now. But yeah, let's get rid of this stuff for now. And I'll probably body work this a little bit, hit this thing with a flap disc and just clean it up a little bit and see where we are. Okay, so I've done some grinding and some cleanup on this face and on this face. And now it's relatively flat and smooth, and I've got this thing cut out. So now I'm going to try to refit the rear quarters and see where we are. All right, a couple things. So this interface looks pretty great. Gap is really good in here. It's gonna be easy to weld that up. But the important part is this thing is now about a 1/2 inch outboard, which is where it needed to be. I'm excited to see how the deck lid looks in this spot. I think I'm gonna put one screw here. Probably put a screw right here just to make sure it's there and it works. So I am super close on the car. What I'm gonna do now is just do a couple of measurements. Really the main measurement is gonna be here to here. And make sure I have that right on this car, because once it's right, I'm gonna stick a couple of tech screws in and I'm gonna call it. $863. So that was great. These things are spot on, 863 millimeters side to side. I picked up these cool aluminum deck lid hinges from a dude off of Craigslist. I don't know if Rennch or who Rennline makes them, but I thought they were rad. So I'm gonna throw them on and throw the deck lid on. Right now the panel gaps look killer. So I think we're good. I think we've gotten this thing close enough that I can throw a couple of screws in, won't be afraid to throw a few welds in this thing and call it a day. Really excited about this. I think it just looks great. It's gonna be fine. I have to obviously adjust the deck lid, but yeah, dudes, I think this is a win for the day. I might throw the latch in here right now just to kind of see how this thing tracks, and maybe give this deck lid a little bit more adjustment for really no reason. It's got to come off another 1,700 times by the time this car is built, but maybe just for my own peace of mind and make sure that it's pretty darn close, which I do feel like it is. So I'm gonna tinker a bit more with the gaps and adjusting the hinges. I've never really adjusted deck lid hinges until they're perfect. So I'm gonna read up on it a little bit and find out what the best strategy is. I might tinker a bit with the latch. Might throw the latch in just to see how it looks once I've tinkered a little. I'm gonna call that a wrap. So thanks for following along with the build. Thank you for subscribing, and I'll see you next time.